Can everyone hear me in the back? It is a pleasure to be here. I have to tell you that I have this book, Yes. And obviously in English it means breaking through barriers and making things happen. And I'm a great believer. My career is one of not looking at obstacles but finding ways around them and having success and having a great career. So I love the name on this book. Anyway, my name is Dawn Hudson. I honestly do not speak or understand Arabic, so I'm not sure what they told you about me. So I'll start and tell you my story, but let me tell you that I believe many of you in the room are interested in starting your own businesses if you haven't already. You're working in companies, and what my career is made up is largely a lot of large corporate experience, and I will share what I have learned through that. But I would tell you, as I now am in a part of my career when I advise many companies, startup companies starting out, I talk to them about three things that I think make for success. One is no matter what service or restaurant or product that you want to make and offer to people as your new business, I would challenge you that one of the big differences between success and failure is the extent to which you understand exactly who is this product or service for? How is it different than what is on the market today? It is the core fundamental elements of marketing and understanding how to position your service or brand in the context of what else is available. And I'll talk to you about what I've learned from that in my days, particularly at Pepsi. The second thing is no matter how great the idea, how you go about getting it to people. Where it is, where you put it, if it's a restaurant, where you locate it, if it's a product, what kind of a package you put it in. That can actually, even as good an idea it is, can mean the difference between success and failure. And thirdly, almost everyone I've spoken to who's been successful or not successful in starting a business, it has been about did they have enough capital, did they have enough money to stay with the idea, to make inevitably the changes and the modifications they have to make to take a good idea and make it great and connect with people. So getting the right idea, understanding the key things to operate that business and make it successful, and having enough money is the difference between success and failure. And I sit on a board today of a venture capital firm that invests in new technology companies. And the thing I notice is that, sadly, 1 out of 20 will succeed. And the difference between which ones succeed and which ones don't is just the extent to which they know really how to tell people what makes their service or technology different, and then do they have the staying power to stay with it long enough financially to get over some of the hurdles they'll face. So anyway, I look forward to you tonight to share my story and what I have learned, and hope it is applicable to your business. Oh, somebody's calling. This is. Okay, my story. Probably be bored by it, but I grew up in the East Coast of the United States, in Massachusetts, outside of a town called Boston. And what was very influential to me was that I was okay, I have this wonderful microphone on. Can you hear me better now? All right. Take this thing away. Great, I can move around too. So I was born and raised in Boston, and my family, my father came from a family of 4 boys. And they were big baseball players. In fact, my grandfather and my uncle played for a team called the Baltimore Orioles. So when my father ended up with 3 daughters, I think he was a little bit in shell shock. But I was lucky. I was the oldest daughter, and he basically introduced me to sports and did things that perhaps he would have done had he had a son. So I grew up watching baseball, playing baseball, learning a lot of sports. And one of the things I did is become very competitive at tennis. And I share this with you because tennis and sports, I competed throughout New England, I competed nationally, and it taught me, sports taught me a lot about the importance of focus, the importance of not getting down when you hit an obstacle, the importance of really relying self-reliance, because I was usually out there by myself trying to hang in there for 2 hours. But the sport was very kind to me. I did well, and I think it's one of the reasons I got into college. Hopefully I had the grades and I had the scores, but I was a competitor. And so I went to a college called Dartmouth College. It's one of the Ivy League schools, one of the smaller Ivy League schools in the United States, and it was a school that was all male. And I was the first class of women who, well, I was actually the fourth class of women, but the first class that enjoyed Dartmouth as an all-female, all girls in every class. But that meant there was 5% of the college campus was women and 95% were men. And it taught me how to succeed, how to get along in a man's world, and as I entered business, it was a skill that was very helpful to me. So after 4 years at Dartmouth, I majored in English. I had a real creative bent, and I liked to write, and I liked to visualize things, and a minor in economics. And I came out of college at a time when there weren't a lot of jobs, not unlike today, hard for young people to get a job. But I was walking across the campus of the college I went to, and someone stopped me and said, "Dawn, you should go talk to this advertising agency that's visiting the college. You would be great in advertising." Oh, what's advertising? Well, I quickly went back and did some research and talked to some people and quickly learned that it is a business that helps people market and position their products and create communication to tell people about that. And it tends to attract and retain people that are both analytical as well as creative. And so that started to describe some of what I thought made me different, and I decided to apply for a job in advertising. And I was very lucky in that I got that job in advertising, and I worked for a company called Compton Advertising, a company that no longer exists, that was part of all the mergers and acquisitions that have gone on over the last 30 years in the advertising business. But what I was able to do is learn from my client. The client was Procter & Gamble. It was Procter & Gamble's largest agency, and they had a tremendous training program. And if there's a theme through my career and through my life, it's that you never stop learning. And you're inquisitive, and you go out and look for opportunities. If there's some area that you don't know enough about, you ask and you go get that learning. So after I worked in advertising for 3-4 years, I had an opportunity to go on to the client side and be the client that is an agency I was working with. And that client was Clairol Hair Coloring. Subsequently, it's been purchased by Procter & Gamble. But I worked there, and I had a terrific experience to work in a global context. And a lot of people early on in my career did not understand the global scene. But I will tell you, one of the reasons I'm happy to be here is that 50 years ago, my grandparents spent 5 years living in the Middle East. They lived in Amman, Jordan. They traveled extensively throughout the Middle East, and my grandfather's was in charge of helping tourism and hotels take hold and be successful in the Middle East. So I have a passion for travel, and when I was asked at Clairol to work on importing a brand from France, which was a fairly unusual thing to do at the time, I leapt on the opportunity, and I learned a tremendous amount about working with a company in a different language and a different culture. After being at Clairol, and getting married to my husband, who had a great job opportunity in Chicago, I moved to Chicago. And in moving to Chicago, I went back into the agency business. And I worked in the agency business for 10 more years, during which time we had our first child, and we decided to move back to New York to raise our children around family, because my husband's family is from New York and mine is from the Boston area. So we moved back to New York. And in New York, my largest client, I worked then for an advertising agency called Doyle Dane Bernbach, shortened DDB, part of the large conglomerate of Omnicom. And at Omnicom, I ran account management, and one of my biggest global accounts was Frito-Lay, which is a division of PepsiCo, so you kind of understand maybe that's how I got to Pepsi. Anyway, I was working with Frito-Lay, I was working with them around the world, and I had an opportunity to go to a different agency and to go as the first woman to run this large agency that was, again, a large Procter & Gamble shop. It was called Darcius, Macias, Benton & Bowles, and it's no longer around today. It's part of the Publicis chain, but it's about 1,000 people in New York, and it was struggling. And it was struggling because it wasn't really attracting young people. It wasn't attracting the next generation. It wasn't attracting new business. And I felt that I could change the agency and that I could bring a new vitality to it. I could get new business. I could work with Procter & Gamble that I knew quite well. But what I learned when I went there was probably the single hardest year of my career. And I share that because I also think it was maybe the year I learned the most. That when you're having difficulty, when you're up against a challenge, can't get your business to work, if you think and you listen and you think about what one or two things you can do, not do everything, but one or two things to change the trend, you can have success. So when I went there, the head of the creative office had been asked off the business by Procter & Gamble. Our people were leaving. We were losing business. And so I said, well, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on our largest customer, Procter & Gamble. I'm going to focus on the single biggest piece of business we have with them that needs help, a new campaign, and that was Pampers, diapers. And I'm going to try to get one new piece of business. And in doing so, I'm going to demonstrate to the staff that we can stabilize the agency and we can, in fact, grow again. And again, I point often to that year of time in terms of the importance of having a singular vision, of being very clear with people and leading them to help me, take the agency forward and not try to do too many things, try to do two things well. And we did stabilize the agency and we did turn it around. And about a year later, I got a call from a gentleman by the name of Steve Reineman. And Steve was my client at Frito-Lay, and I was no longer working with him since I had left that advertising agency. And he called me up and he said, Dawn, would you have dinner with me and allow me to talk to you about an opportunity for you to come and join Frito-Lay? And I'll be honest with you, and I've learned from this, I thought to myself, there is no way I'm going to switch jobs. I've just gotten to be running this agency. It's the biggest job I ever thought I'd have in my career. I'm loyal to people, I'm going to stay, but maybe he needs an agency. And I'll go and have dinner with him because maybe out of it I'll get a new account for the agency. Well, what he did is convince me that I should go back to the client side and I should join Frito-Lay. Not because there was anything wrong with my current path, because it represented for me a way to learn, a way to do not just about marketing a brand and creating advertising, but figuring out everything else that goes into making a product successful, from how you make the product, to what package you put it in, to how you get it made cost effectively, to how you sell it into retail. And that total package was the thing I had really liked about working at Clairol, and I was able to do again in going back to PepsiCo. So I took the job at Frito-Lay of being head of marketing and sales for Frito-Lay everywhere but the United States. And again, tremendous job at a point in time when not a lot of people had global experience. Am I killing that mic?
Yes,
okay. Well, board one already. So, at any rate, I did join Frito-Lay. I did run the international business. I'll share with you some of my business learnings. But quickly, they moved me from Frito-Lay to Pepsi. And at Pepsi, I was the head of marketing. I then became after about 4 years doing that job, I became president of the division. And about 2 years later, I became chief executive officer. And while I was chief executive officer, I took the food service businesses, the parts of PepsiCo at Quaker and Frito-Lay and Pepsi that serviced restaurants and cafeterias, and combined it into one organization. Because our clients were saying, why do I have to have 3 people from PepsiCo calling me when you guys are all under one roof? You're all one company. So it was a phenomenal experience, and I did that until 5 years ago. And I can't tell you how much I thank the PepsiCo Corporation and Pepsi for the amazing amounts of experience I had, one of which was to get asked to tour the Middle East about 6 years ago to understand how Pepsi has more market share in the Middle East than any other place in the world. And they thought that if I saw this, I would find a way to get that kind of dominance back in the United States. And I'll have to say that I failed, because that was a very tall task. But I certainly did learn about building tremendous displays of Pepsi. Anyway, 5 years ago, I left Pepsi-Cola. People ask me why. Great job, phenomenal company. But my job was changing. It was a job, when I joined there, I was a job to grow the business, to grow soft drinks. And what I did over my 11 years at PepsiCo was really look and see that the world of beverages was not just about soft drinks. That in fact, oh, another one down. They're dropping fast. At any rate, I think my claim to fame at PepsiCo is the ability to realize that people wanted a healthier array of beverages, and they did not want just Pepsi and Coke. And so we formed a partnership with Unilever to market mass tea beverages under the Lipton name. We formed a partnership with Starbucks to market ready-to-drink beverages that you can buy in supermarkets and convenience stores. We sold water, which people thought we couldn't get Americans to buy bottled water, but we did. We made it an enormous business. And it was through focusing on where consumers were headed and seeing that trend, honestly, faster than Coke. And one of the things that big companies, and I'll talk about big companies, they protect what they know. They're big, and they're slow, and they're hard to turn. So the opportunity for entrepreneurs and smaller companies is to realize either markets that are underserved by those big brands or trends that other people can see faster than big companies. Anyway, we gained share from Coca-Cola for 5 years in a row while I was there, not because Pepsi grew faster than Coke, it grew a little bit faster, but really because we saw the trend toward healthier beverages and acquired Tropicana, acquired Izzy Beverages, and created our own joint ventures to really develop that category. So I left because the business became not about growth. There was an obesity epidemic that continues in the United States, and I found disproportionately my time was spent in Washington trying to defend sugary beverages and try to defend against taxes. And in fact, Americans' pursuit of healthier eating and healthier foods was causing the soft drink industry to decline at about a rate of 3 to 5% per year. It's very hard to keep a business healthy, growing, delivering the profit growth that investors expect without cutting a lot of heads and downsizing. And I can do it, but I don't like doing that as much as I like growing things. So I left PepsiCo, and I left Pepsi-Cola. And what I did was to join a series of company boards of directors, where I was a board of director of a publicly traded company. My job was to represent, still is today, shareholders. And in the process, I was able to serve on some fantastic companies. I served on the board of P.F. Chang's, Asian food restaurants. I think you have a few here. Not in Kuwait. I think you have them in Dubai. Are there any in Kuwait? Yeah, they're in Kuwait now. They weren't when I was there. Anyway, we took the company private. I served on the board of Allergan, which is the makers of Botox and eye products, helping people see. Great company. I serve on the board of Lowe's Home Improvement Stores, which helps people love the homes they live in. And I serve on the board of Interpublic Group. Interpublic Group is a large conglomerate of advertising agencies. And my most current board is NVIDIA, which is in Silicon Valley in California. It's a company that makes graphic chip cards and is one of the leading technology developers for supercomputing today. And I did it because I didn't know a darn thing about technology and computers, and I was interested in the thought to be a marketer and to understand how people market today and the importance of technology, I should be there at the table. So I did that, and today I continue to serve on 3 corporate boards of directors, but I also started a consulting business. And I started it with a small company called Parthenon, and I focused on the consumer space. And I built the business in London, then in Shanghai, Singapore, and had a wonderful time understanding what it takes to do a small business and attract talent to that business and really work it from the ground up. Very, very different than what I'd done at PepsiCo. So we just sold that company to a large accounting firm called Ernst & Young. And it created an opportunity for me to listen to a friend of mine that picked up the phone and called me. And throughout my career, I've always felt that you have to listen, you have to learn. And this was a call from the commissioner of the NFL, whom I had worked with when I was at PepsiCo. And he asked me, if any of you know, the NFL is under a fair amount of pressure these days in the United States. It's the #1 sport by far. However, some of the players a minority of the players have been associated with incidents of violence. and it's really hurting the league, it's hurting the reputation of football, and they asked me to join and be the senior ranking woman at the National Football League to try to address some of these things and make sure that the brand endures this PR situation and comes out strong and ensure that football is connecting with youth for the next generation. So that's my current job. I serve on boards, and I'm with the National Football League. But I want to tell you a little bit about what I learned when I was at PepsiCo, because I understand that 70% of the new businesses started here in Kuwait have something to do with food, either a restaurant, a service, a product. And so I thought I would tell you what I've learned and how, even though I've learned it in a large company situation, it's very applicable to starting your own business. So when I was head of Frito-Lay, one of the challenges was the company had bought, in looking at their business and saying, I can only get so much growth out of the United States, I have to take advantage of the snacking of the rest of the world. They went about going and buying the top 41 brands of potato chips across the world. Now, big companies, uh-oh, I've lost another one. They're dropping like flies. Anyway, what my job was to do is to say, can we take these 41 brands and knit them into one global brand? Now, why would you want to do this? The world is not hungering. They know these chips all locally. The reason you want to do it is because you get scale and you get leverage. And if you get one package to produce around the world, that's easier than producing 41 different ones. If you can find out how to make potato chips in a consistent manner and whether you can do that in a way that appeals to all the people in those 41 countries, you can make a better potato chip and simplify your supply chain and do it more cost effectively. And then the biggest thing they wanted to do, which they thought they never could do, was individual countries are their tastes differ. And so the seasoning that goes on a potato chip is very different country to country, and they wondered whether there was a way to create a base of seasoning and then vary it a little bit to meet the needs of the different countries. So it was a challenge, and it was something that resulted in what we did, and we talked to people. We understood Lay's doesn't really mean anything in many, many languages, but that was a benefit too, in that we could then imbue meaning to it. We developed this iconography of the red ribbon, and we would have that red ribbon and the globe, the sun, meaning the warmth of the sun that grows the potatoes that go into the bag, could be consistent everywhere, and that we would take the brand names and we would swap them out fairly aggressively. So what we did is take Matutano on the left. That was a brand in Spain of potato chips. So we took Matutano and we put in Lay's under it for 6 months. So people got used to seeing Lay's on the package. 6 months later, we switched the position. We put Lay's large, Matutano small. 6 months later, Matutano was gone. And I'm really amazed, but it teaches you something about how quick people are to adapt and to learn new things. And we created the Lay's brand everywhere except 2 countries, the UK and Sabritas. In the UK, there's a brand of crisps called Walkers, and it was way too entrenched to be able to change the brand name out. We didn't want to do that. And also in Mexico, where Sabritas is the #2 brand behind Coca-Cola in Mexico. So, let's go forward. There. So now Lay's is around the world, and it also provided a platform where Lay's could then diversify itself. Now, something I'll tell you about that journey is that while this is going on, I believe this is going on very much in Kuwait right now, which is that people are trying to realize that to the degree they've fallen in love with processed food, easy food to grab, quick serve food, that maybe they're eating more than they should and they're not eating as healthy as they want to. So we saw this trend going on in the United States and in many countries around the world, and so we divided our portfolio into 3 groups. At the very bottom you see what we call the fun-for-you products. Products like, frankly, Pepsi, and products like Lay's potato chips that are just, they're a treat, they taste great, they maybe have a little bit of fat, some good taste, but people like them. Then we said there's people who are really, and not everyone, but there are segments of the population, particularly women, who are wanting to eat more healthily. So we would take some of the fat content down, take some of the salt content down. And we called these products better for you. They're not quite as indulgent as the fun for you products. But you know what? They weren't really delivering what people were looking for, which is naturally good for you and healthy. So the company then invested and grew the top line, which was the products that genuinely are good for you, that have nutritious ingredients in them. So we bought Tropicana, we bought Quaker Oats to get at whole grain technology, and we launched a whole series of products aimed at this group. And it's proved very successful for PepsiCo. The snack portfolio of the business continues to drive the lion's share of their profitability and their growth. It's also enabled the company, with the strength of the Lay's name, to take the Lay's name now, 10 years later, 15 years later, and go into bread snacks, go into crackers, go into other categories that the company before hadn't been able to go into because they didn't have the right brand name. So I'm going to tell you about Skinny Pop, and I'm going to tell you about Skinny Pop. I'm on the board of this company, $20 million company, nothing like Frito-Lay, very small for the United States. But it's a great example of how to beat the big guys. So the big guys are selling potato chips, they're selling tortilla chips. They're not paying attention to a category called popcorn, a category that in the scheme of things is small for them. At Frito-Lay, you see these trucks driving around delivering product, and the people that drive those trucks get paid on the amount of volume they sell. So they know that if they put out more potato chips, people love them, they'll sell more. And the smaller brands don't get the attention they ought to get. And frankly, they don't make the money for the route driver who gets incented on scale volume. So these categories that are smaller become very good categories for entrepreneurs to attack. So Frito-Lay has a product called Smart Food that we actually bought 15 years ago, and they could never do anything with it because it was too small a brand to really work in their big, large-scale system. So two people in Chicago, a man and a woman, get together with this idea of branding popcorn. Now, popcorn naturally is better for you. It's made of popcorn. Put it in a little oil, pop it, add some salt, add some flavorings. It's a healthy snack. So they came up with the name Skinny Pop. They put it in a package that was different from other packages, cleaner, whiter, said healthy, and literally they put it into a few stores in Chicago, and they nurtured it for about 3 years. And when they finally got enough of a following in Chicago, they went to some of the grocery stores, some of the large chains, and they were able to get into those chains. And they had enough profitability to be able to pay the fees that those grocery stores wanted to put the product on the shelf. And it took them 3 years of success in the Chicago area to finally attract the likes of Costco and Walmart and large national retailers. And they tested the brand, and the brand did well with consumers, and so they expanded it. So I share with you because here's a niche that a bunch of people, a group of people really want, where two people just bootstrap, put it together, found somebody to make it for them, and then had the staying power to spend 7 years getting this company to the point of national distribution. Now, what they realized is that the step from here was to have to market it, to have to innovate, to come up with more package types, and every single one of those steps required more money. And they were not going to be able to do this fast enough if they were just using the cash flow off the product they were making today. So they decided to sell the company. Private equity was very interested. So private equity bought this brand, and with the influx of cash into this brand, it's gone from 20 million in sales to 150 million in sales in less than 6 months, just through the strength of distribution. So it's a great example, and there are many, many, but I go around to private equity firms and I talk to them, or I talk to venture capital firms or entrepreneurs about, don't be scared to go into a category where the big guys are. If you're going to go in those categories, look for the smaller opportunities. Don't try to talk to all consumers. Talk to 2% of them that want something very specifically different for them. And the big guys won't look at you in the beginning because they can't go after those niches. And you really can be very, very successful. So at Pepsi, am I doing all right on time? I'll tell you what I learned. First of all, I think there are some pharmacists in the room, right? Yes? I know there are some pharmacists in the room. So Pepsi and Coke were developed by pharmacists. It was something that they concocted behind their soda fountains in their stores to remedy when people's stomachs were a little bit upset. And what they quickly realized is that after people's stomachs were made to feel better through Pepsi and Coke, they'd come back and they would order it again. And literally, Coke and Pepsi were founded by two different pharmacists, one state away in the southeast of the United States within 5 years of each other, both by pharmacists. And the man who founded Pepsi-Cola was a man by the name of Caleb Bradham, and he lived on the coast of North Carolina in New Bern. And he was smart enough to know he had something here, and so he contacted some other business people that distributed other beverages, and he sold the formula to them, and he gave them regional distribution rights. And so Coke and Pepsi started to become big brands, distributed nearly everywhere in the United States until the 1920s. In the 1920s, there was a very big recession in the United States, and a lot of people were without jobs, they didn't have money, and interestingly, Coke had picked a set of partners to distribute Coca-Cola that were financially more secure than the people that Pepsi had chosen. And Coke stayed in business through the recession, and Pepsi did not. It literally went out of business and stopped being distributed. So when the recession was over, a generation later from Caleb Bradham had the formula to Pepsi and decided, could he get back in business? And the issue for the soft drink business at that time is it was sold exclusively in bottles, in little 6-ounce bottles. And the biggest part of the expense in making Pepsi or Coke was the bottle. So someone came along who had a lot of excess bottles after the Depression, and they were 12-ounce bottles that other beverages and that beer was carried in. And these bottles were available for a very, very inexpensive price. And so Pepsi got back into business by buying that lot of bottles and now selling 12 ounces of Pepsi for the same price as 6 ounces of Coca-Cola. And it created a radio. At the time, there was no internet, there was no digital media, but the least expensive media you could use was radio. And so they created a radio commercial that talked about you could get twice as much for a nickel too for Pepsi. And I share with you that, brands, how brands connect with people are so important, whether you're talking about a small business or a large business. It's, are you offering something differentiated, and are you connecting emotionally with people? Now, what happened with Pepsi, and I bet a number of you in this room could guess, is after you start screaming for 5 years how you could sell twice as much for a nickel too, people start to think of you as cheap. If they have the money, they're going to buy Coke. If they don't have the money, they're going to buy Pepsi. And that's not a great recipe for long-term success and being able to get great profitability out of Pepsi. So Pepsi evolved. The chairman of Pepsi in the 1950s was married to a movie star named Joan Crawford. And it was pretty easy for him to convince her to go into ads for Pepsi, positioning the brand as what sociable people in Hollywood drink. And so there were a lot of print ads with people drinking Pepsi in situations with lots of celebrities. And it gave birth to Pepsi as an entertainment brand, as a brand more connected with youth. And a very, very smart person that I was lucky enough to work with in the 1970s saw this trend of Pepsi being consumed more by young people than people in general, said, hey, here's a way to position Pepsi. And who doesn't want to be young at heart? So I'm going to take this baby boomer generation that are just getting into their 20s, and I'm going to say this is the beverage for you. And so this is one of the first commercials they used to launch that Choice of a New Generation campaign. Music. That's good. I need a pause in between them.
You're a whole new generation. You're dancing through the day. You're grabbing for the magic on the run. You're a whole new generation. You're loving what they do. I put a Pepsi in the motion.
That was a very successful campaign for Pepsi and led to a number of music celebrities that we did business with, and really led to a period of 15 years that Pepsi gained share from Coke. I'm going to show you the next campaign, and I'm going to show it to you because it was not born out of a big fancy advertising agency on Madison Avenue in New York. It was born in a small town in Texas by a bottler that operated a small geography with 20 trucks. But there was some insight, and the insight was this. If I put Pepsi and Coke, and I tested each of you, I blindfolded you, and I had you take a sip of Pepsi, and I had you take a sip of Coke. What I would tell you is that, well, first of all, before I blindfold you, I'd say, what do you prefer? And in the United States, 25% of the people can tell the taste of Pepsi, and 25% of the people can identify the taste of Coke, and they're very, very loyal to those two brands. And 50% of the country really doesn't taste the difference, doesn't care, and will just buy whatever's on sale. Now, someone ran a taste test at headquarters and shared it with the bottlers, and it went like this. They blindfolded people, and they had them try Pepsi and Coke. And guess what? 56 people out of 100 preferred the taste of Pepsi. Now, given that Pepsi's market share was a third of that of Coca-Cola's, this surprised a lot of people. So this small bottler in Texas decided to create a local campaign where he would go out and run in local banks, grocery stores, fairs, sidewalks, parades. He'd put a little booth up. He'd put behind that booth Pepsi and Coke. He'd have people choose. And of course, if they did pick Pepsi, they got a coupon for Pepsi. But it's an example of a big brand getting very local in its marketing, and it was enormously successful. And the company ended up taking his idea. Their great ideas are created everywhere, and then using it nationally. And I actually brought it back about 15 years ago and used it again because it was such a successful campaign to kind of surprise people that what they think they're drinking all the time may not really be what they prefer. So I will show you that.
I want you to taste these two colas.
In side-by-side blind taste tests,
I have one more.
nationwide, more people prefer the taste of Pepsi over Coca-Cola. Here are Ann Mack and Molly Wynant taking a similar test.
Can you tell me which one you prefer?
L. I like Velvet.
I'll take the shield away, and we'll let you in on our secret.
You're both sure you like L better.
Right.
What was your choice? L is what?
Pepsi. It's Pepsi.
You think this was a fair test?
Definitely.
If you were to see something like this on television, would you be skeptical or would you believe it?
I would believe it.
Well, it's much more believable when you yourself participate in the taste. But you're laughing at Grandmother because Grandmother likes Pepsi?
Don't take our word for it. Let your taste decide. Take the Pepsi challenge.
So that was often written about campaign. And I share that with you because if you're in the food business or the restaurant business, you know, people, tasting is believing. And, you know, if you can't afford huge national sampling programs, usually there's somebody in your family or friends or someone that works for you that can go set up a booth and let people try it. And then that word of mouth that they can then spread socially today to tell about that experience can be worth its weight in gold. So sometimes the simplest things are some of the best marketing programs. There's one final commercial I'll show you, which is what we did is evolve the thought. So one of the problems in business that Pepsi has, and I see Ed sitting in front here, is that a third of all beverages are consumed in restaurants and in cafeterias and out of vending machines. And Pepsi, in the 1980s and 1990s, started to buy restaurants and operate restaurants. And not surprisingly, a lot of restaurants said, you're competing with me. Why do I want to carry Pepsi in your restaurants? So things like Burger King and Wendy's stopped selling Pepsi, and Pepsi's share really declined, and already Coke had been a really dominant player. Now, why this is important is in the restaurant business is where people, when they eat, they choose a restaurant based on the food that their restaurant is going to sell them. And they aren't terribly picky about which beverage they can get when they get that food. So if you're in that restaurant and you're serving Pepsi versus Coke, people will ask for a Pepsi or a Coke, whatever cola you have available. So that trial mechanism, so critical to the young generation to get them to try your product and then grow up on it, Pepsi was enormously disadvantaged. And so after it sold off its restaurants, because it said we're not going to be able to keep growing Pepsi if we're competing against the restaurant industry, focused back on its drinks and its snacks, I then had the challenge of how do we begin to grow our share of the beverage business again. And one of the things we did is we decided to try to help people understand that maybe it's not all the same. And maybe, through the art of marketing, people can taste the difference between Coke and Pepsi, and they're discerning. And if you want to differentiate your restaurant from everything else out there, maybe you ought to carry Pepsi instead of Coke.
How you doing, Sarge? Okay, folks, what'll it be?
What would you like, sweetheart?
A Pepsi, please.
Sorry, we only have Coke. Now you've done it.
You're sorry? Not half as sorry as you're gonna be. I ordered a Pepsi, pal.
She's got a mind of her own.
What's with this guy?
Look, I just thought...
You thought? What you really thought was that I don't know the difference between Pepsi and a Coke, right?
Here's your Pepsi.
Thank you.
Kids say the darndest things.
What are you looking at?
I like this place.
That was a famous voice from a movie and The Godfather, and so it led to a whole campaign of that little girl having very funny voices come out of her mouth whenever somebody tried to pull one over on her and serve her a Coke versus a Pepsi. But what kind of I've learned about marketing in the beverage business, and I think it applies to snacks too, is you can have the best tasting product in the world, and you may or may not be successful. Taste is important. You can't sell something that tastes like styrofoam or paper or cardboard. It has to be really good. But getting people to understand that is a whole lot more than just about the product you create. It's about the package you put it in. It's about the brand and the emotional connection you get with people. And in the beverage and food business, it is about availability. People try products when they're out and about, when they're shopping, when they're going to school, when they're coming home, and if you're not at those locations where they're stopping, you're not going to be successful. And that's why the soft drink business and the salty snack business have been heavily reliant on direct store-door delivery. It's a very expensive distribution system. It costs about 10% more than regular distribution, but the results is it puts it in more places and people can try it. And that trial is so critical to building habit, loyalty, and getting people to know your brand. Secondly is that if you cannot make your product at really a good cost structure, then you're not going to have the money to invest to be able to do the things you need to do to get that availability. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the beauty of the food industry and particularly packaged foods in terms of how you can handle your pricing to make sure you're getting as much profit as you can to, again, invest back in the business. And then obviously I'm a marketer. Brand development is so critical. Now, it's more than just taste, as we've talked a lot about. In terms of availability, what people probably don't realize is that Coke and Pepsi make upwards of 2/3 of their profit from convenience stores. Single serve, people pay more for it. In grocery stores, it's about tonnage, and people are much more thoughtful about the price they pay. But when they are thirsty and they want a cold beverage, they are more willing to pay a higher price. And that's why that convenience store, that single serve, is so important to the profitability of the business. Now, in terms of a brand, I say everybody in this room is a marketer, because everybody is a consumer and you taste and understand things. But the difference between a really great successful marketer, I believe, and everyone else is the ability to make choices. Marketing is a discipline of not trying to appeal to everyone, not trying to reach everyone. It's about understanding in whatever you're selling, what are your competitors doing, how does your product or service offer something different than what they're doing. And if it doesn't offer something significantly different in taste, in the kind of package it's in a service it provides, I wouldn't put money into it. Because long term, you've got to differentiate yourself amongst those that are already well established. So that's about developing the brand, understanding your target, understanding how can you put it into a service, a form, an online form that's different from other people? Everybody here, I understand, is very into social media, very into, I suspect, e-commerce, putting up websites, viewed as the cheaper way to build a business. Well, yes and no. It is efficient, but it requires all the same disciplines as creating a national television commercial, which is to say there is content overload. Whether you're on Twitter, you're on Instagram, you pay attention to that which stands out. And so whether you're developing a marketing program on digitally or you're doing something on television, you have to understand, who am I talking to, what am I going to tell them about my product that makes it different, and how am I going to connect, what's my insight, how am I going to connect emotionally to them. So I would urge you to really think through and be able to, in a very simple way, be able to tell the person next to you what makes your product or service better than what's out there today. So with that, I think I'll open it. I think we're going to take a break, and then we're going to do some Q&A. But I thank you for this opportunity, and I wish you all great success in all the businesses that you're starting, and hope a little bit of my big company experience is relevant to you. Thanks.
And welcome to Tmkeen, Kuwait. I'm very curious to ask you, Dawn. You gave us a small sort of bit of information on what went on with PepsiCo during your time there. But most of our audience members are small business owners and entrepreneurs. And I'm pretty sure that they have some more complex questions for you in relation to their businesses. And my first question to you is, in your opinion, what are the 4 most important steps for the successful launch of a small business?
So I'm pausing because if I were going to launch a small business, the first thing I would do is I'd think about the ideas I had across different categories and services, and I'd try to pick an area where the trends were behind me. Some call it having wind at your back. Try to pick categories or services or opportunities where they're going to grow, because it's much easier to grow something when the whole category is growing. Having picked what your that's my first piece of advice. My second piece of advice is you're going to need to be passionate about it. Starting a business is not easy. In fact, probably the easiest piece is starting it. And then continue to nurture it and grow it is hard work, and usually takes longer and is more expensive than you think. So it should be something that you really love, because you're going to put your heart and soul and a lot of time into it. Once you've done that, I think the 2 things to think about, actually I get back to, maybe I have to go 5, 3, is
not a problem.
How am I going to simply tell people what is it about my idea that makes it different than what's available in the market today? Critically important to be able to have something that is differentiated and that you can tell people simply about, because that will allow you to communicate it simply. Second thing is to think about, in order to get this product or service or this restaurant up and going, what is going to be the things that are most critical to its success? So if it's in the packaged goods area, I would tell you it would be a package that stands out on shelf, that people will naturally have an easy time picking out and saying, oh, that's something different. If it's a restaurant, it's probably opening it in the best location. And not all locations are created equal. The biggest locations are often expensive. Who is this restaurant going to appeal to? And how do I pick a location where a disproportionate number of those kinds of people go by that location? And the third thing is, in most cases, whatever money you think you will need to launch this business, you will need more. And thinking through how you can efficiently start the business and how you're going to get capital to keep it going as it grows is critical to think about at the beginning, not as you get into the middle of it and say, oh no, I can't make payroll, I can't pay people, I'm running out of money.
Which leads me to my second question. A lot of times people think, well, should I invest my own money into starting something? Or should I perhaps go and get a loan from a bank? Or should I find seed money through an investor? What is probably a better financial sound way to go about funding?
Well, if you can right away get a bank or someone to invest behind you, that's great. My experience is that people expect you to have some proven amount of success before they're going to lend you money. And therefore, putting some of your own money into it is an important symbol that you really believe in this idea and you're going to stay with it. The second place most people get is angel investors, people therefore that know you, that also want to invest in it. And then after you have some degree of success, you can get additional bank loans and you can get funding from other people.
When you say angel investors, do you recommend going to family members, or do you sort of...
I think it's very difficult to mix business and family. Sometimes you have no choice, but if you can get it outside the family, I recommend that.
I see. How important is research, finding out what the competition has to offer? How detrimental is it to a business or a small startup not to do the proper research? And sometimes you may have a great idea, but how do you know if it's going to actually fly?
Well, that's an excellent question, and I think you know, big companies like I have worked for, they'll spend millions of dollars on research, and a small startup can't do that.
Exactly.
But there's something. The thought that you're going to understand how people react to your product or your service you're offering, your dental plan, that philosophy of listening to people and learning from people and listening, not to, you know, you may think you have the greatest idea in the world. Be open to hearing people say, yes, but it doesn't do this. Yes, I think it should have this. So if you can't afford major research, you can definitely give it to friends, ask friends to give it to friends, get your reaction to it.
Right.
You can put your idea online. You can ask people to tweet about it. There are many efficient ways today to get feedback, and I would urge people to just listen. I think some of the most successful business people are people who are able to really open their ears to feedback they're getting, see an opportunity. And the other thing I would tell you is most businesses are not birthed perfectly.
Right.
They evolve. You know, even you take a Starbucks. Starbucks was Pete's Coffee in Seattle, and it was a little coffee storefront. And it wasn't until Howard Schultz went to Italy and he saw this phenomenon of people wanting to hang out at a coffee bar, and that it was what he calls a third place. It was a place other than work and home where you could socialize, that he really got the vision for how to grow the company.
Right. So what do you recommend as a sort of a spend ratio, advertising to the bottom line? Must one reinvest into the business in order to sort of feel better when you sleep at night, if you know what I mean?
It's a hard question to answer, because when you are small, you're going to spend a larger percent, and then as you get scale, you know, you're going to spend 5%. I think the way I would think about it is, if you can, take every penny of profit you get and turn it into marketing, telling people about it, sharing with it for as long as you can, because that's going to grow your business. But you all know in this room, if you've launched businesses, I wish it were all about creating an idea and marketing it. But often the difference between success and failure isn't how good the idea was, or even whether you marketed it well. It's, you know, could you keep it coming out of the plant on time and get it to the stores when they wanted it? Could you keep the restaurant open the hours people wanted it to be open? Could you keep people working for you? There are really important operating elements to getting a business going, and that's really what tends to absorb the person starting a business, and they're critical. My advice as a marketer is make sure that you just, as much as you're dealing with those really nitty-gritty important things about launching a business, you keep in mind, again, what's that product and service going to be known for and what makes it different.
I'm going to interrupt.
Is this a special question?
It's actually along the same line as we were talking. Since we are trying to stress the importance of e-commerce and advertising on social media, because that platform, especially for the Kuwaiti small business market, has proven to be a very successful and a useful one. We get a question from the audience member here asking, can you explain the impact, if any, that social networking and online marketing has made on your organization or on you personally?
Well, that's a great question. I'm very passionate about this subject. Obviously, the advertising business that I've been associated with for so long has really become all about the opportunity that digital and social represent for marketing.
Right.
And I'm passionate because I think people think it's the end-all and the be-all. I can tell you, putting video content on, first of all, I'll tell you, I think Kuwait might be maybe the highest market of smartphone penetration that I've come about. I think it's true. Very, very high penetration of smartphones. And that's a great opportunity, right? And you can share your product and share things. I've spent the last 5 years of my life working with companies to really peel apart what they are doing in their digital strategy, how much money they're spending putting content online, how much money they're spending with Facebook, Twitter, what are they doing with their e-commerce site. And what I would tell you is everybody thinks everything is great, and it isn't. Certain things work better for certain areas. For example, I will tell you in the United States, I don't know what holds true here, but banner. Everybody loves to throw a banner ad up. What banners tend to do is get awareness. If you have something and you want to make people more aware of it, use a banner. If you want to really engage with people and get them to click through and spend time thinking about it, don't use a banner because it's over and gone and they don't spend time with it. Look at video content. Look at content that can be shared. The other thing I've learned, the highest return, is if you have a business that has a loyal group of followers and you get their email addresses or their Twitter accounts and you can speak with them on a regular basis, that is the single best way to take people that like your product and get them to use more of it, to visit your restaurant more, to use your service more. Very, very, very effective. Not so effective if you're trying to bring new people in. That's a different task. So be very thoughtful about, the other thing I would tell you, and I see this again and again and again, is not all content is created the same. If I have a celebrity that decides that they want to drink Pepsi and tweet about it, and that person has been in prison, it's going to say something about my brand. I don't want every person talking about it. It may make it seem hot and contemporary, but it doesn't reinforce what Pepsi is about. And I had a situation where I hired a celebrity, and I will not mention her name, but she wasn't the brightest person. And she had trouble understanding that Pepsi was paying her, and therefore, as she went about the country, if she did drink a Coke, somebody was going to take a picture and put it up on Instagram, and it wasn't going to look very good for her. By the way, it wasn't very going to look good for Pepsi either. So there's social media creates a genuineness, a realness, and be very careful who you ask to talk about your product, what you say about it. If you create videos, is it really true to what you want people to know your product or service about? Otherwise, it's just borrowed interest, and I think it's not going to do things well for you long term. There's just way too much content and noise out there. To break through, you've got to have consistency in what you're telling people.
I have another question. Sometimes when small businesses don't necessarily have the funds to advertise often and can only do so much on the social media platforms, do you think that reaching out to the community via CSR sort of engagement, do you think that would help them?
I think it has been the foundation of the development of brands for history, and it's probably more important than ever today, because if you talk particularly to the young generation, and this is true globally from my experience, they very much care about the communities they're from. They want to give back to their communities. We had a very successful campaign I can talk to you about, but being able to show that something comes from a community, that it uses ingredients from the community, it hires people from the community, that's really important, more important to young people today than ever. And so while you may not be able to afford, it may not be the time for your brand or your service to do national advertising, getting out and getting known in a neighborhood and letting that reputation spread to the next neighborhood, that's how great bands are built, and it doesn't happen overnight, even with social media.
Give us an example of something that you did when you were with Pepsi-Cola.
So two things we did which were very, very successful. We created, so the company became independent on the 4th of July, and it has big parades around the country still where old people, young people come out and they parade through town and they stop and they picnic to celebrate the company's birth date. And it is a great opportunity when everyone is gathering, it's summertime, it's warm, people tend to be optimistic, to just bring your product, offer it for free, let people try it. It makes it part of the community, and that word of mouth spreads. And today it spreads faster than ever because it spreads through social media. The second thing we did very successfully at Pepsi, and I will tell you though, it didn't, I'll tell you pros and cons. We formed a association with a company called Do Something. And Do Something was founded by a bunch of teenagers. And the purpose of it was, using online, was to allow people to petition companies to support an idea they had to give back to their community, no matter how small. So they created competitions of young people coming together who would put their own sweat and energy and time into doing something for a community. And they funded those that were the best ideas, and they funded it to the tune of millions and millions of dollars. And they allowed retailers to support it, and it really connected with young people.
Right.
I'll tell you where it fell down is that still a lot of Pepsi's volume runs through the Walmarts and the Costcos and the big, big retailers in the country. And after it was launched, it didn't have relevancy to them. They didn't do enough of tying in the charity that the retailers supported with that charity. I would have done it I left the company at that point, but I would have had young people working on the charities with some of the retailers, so there was a passion between the two, and that would have resulted in displays. Without that display support, it became a great engagement tool for young people that improved people's perceptions of Pepsi, but it didn't sell a lot more Pepsi.
I see. Judging from the questions that I'm getting from the audience, people want to know a little bit more about how you survived being a female in a very sort of male-dominated industry. One of our audience members asks, you mentioned that you started off in a male-dominant environment. Knowing in the Middle East there is an existence of glass ceiling for females reaching leadership positions, except, of course, in the private sectors, what is your advice to break the ceiling for females?
So I have two pieces of advice for women. One is, I've always found that there's opportunity there, but many of the environments I've entered into, which are more male, they feel as awkward as I do. I'm the only female, but they don't know how to relate to me, and they're afraid that if they relate to me, maybe they will offend me. So I've always felt that as a woman, I need to go out of my way to make others comfortable with my presence. So, by the way, now I can just tell a football story, and that's a quick way to talk to any guy in the United States.
Story, yes.
But I think I found that in business, it really is about the relationship you have with your direct boss, because they are the most in control for teaching you and for creating the next opportunity. And I've always felt that it's part of my job to not create awkwardness, to ask questions, to ask for feedback, to ask the kind of things that as a boss I expect that I should do for people that work for me, but as the first woman I didn't expect that to happen for me. So I went out of my way to make it comfortable for people to work with me and support me. I did not have a chip on my shoulder. I did not expect anything differently. So that was one. That was just sort of an attitude, being inclusive. The second thing I did is I always think it's about performance. It's about seeing what you can do. And I would always tell a woman, understand exactly what people are wanting you to do, what does success look like, get it clear that when you're going in to do this job, a year from now, what would you say I would have done that would have made me really successful? And then seek to do that and to excel and do it more. And a lot of people talk about the glass ceiling. Do women have to do, 25% more than a man? I don't know. I don't know how you evaluate that. I just know that when I have delivered and I have succeeded, I've gotten that opportunity. And in the case of Pepsi System, where there were 100 franchise bottlers, there was one female and 99 men running those businesses.
My goodness.
And I wondered, would they support me? And do you know that that community was probably my biggest source of support at Pepsi? And the reason was I listened to them. I didn't think because I was the big franchise company making a lot of money that I knew more than them. I thought that they were small, independent business people in their communities doing really well, and I could learn from them, and I could take their ideas and I could apply them nationally. And secondly, I could understand what is causing them to have difficulty. Are they having difficulty hiring? Are they having difficulty making as much money as they did last year because their cost of cardboard has gone up? One of the hardest things I did in my career was to listen to them about the small guy needing to be able to buy at a competitive rate with the big guys, and doing a simple thing like creating a procurement organization that would help to buy sugar and cardboard and aluminum at good prices for everyone. Created $50 million a year in extra profits that they could invest back in the business. And by the way, it was the hardest $50 million I've ever had to give away, because people were untrusting. They didn't think that if they were used to buying sugar from Joe and they had to accept that I was going to give them sugar when they needed it at a better price, they were concerned they wouldn't be heard, they wouldn't get it. So I had to set up a big process that would ensure that the little guy could expect the same kind of supply as the big guy.
Somebody else asks, how do they go about competing with businesses that are already established, that are the same as the ones that they are hoping to launch, perhaps? Do you look at it as a race, best man wins sort of thing? Do you think that it's a good idea to go into a competitive field, per se?
So I think there's competition everywhere. It's really hard to find an idea that's not going to have some degree of competition.
Right.
If your idea is exactly the same as something else, I would say don't do it. But most ideas...
So have a take on it or a twist on it.
But there's a twist or a take on it.
Right.
And that twist or take might be how you offer the product. It might be a restaurant. It might be the hours of operation. It might be, I mean, this is a silly thing, but when Walmart started out so long ago, it hired senior citizens to greet people as they came in the door. It was a really small thing, but it said this is going to be a different experience. It's personal. And it worked for them for a long time until they got so big. They had a different set of problems.
Right. There are a few questions here regarding Pepsi as well. Somebody asks what the story behind the Pepsi logo is.
Behind what?
The Pepsi logo. How did it come about? Yeah.
So what many of you realize is that when Caleb Bradham created Pepsi, he had somebody write the script of Pepsi-Cola. And that script still survives today in many materials. So some of it is literally the founder and being true to the brand. Okay. The icon of Pepsi, I honestly can't tell you when, many decades ago, someone first put a round circle with a flag through it. Right. But it has been, in small ways, adapted over time. And the most recent change to the Pepsi logo was when the little swirl turned into a smile. And that was a very small change, but it was designed to reinforce that Pepsi makes you smile. And again, the brand is about youthful optimism and looking at things in a positive light. And so that smile was really core to the brand. So that's how it came to be. But I believe the logo became just, it used to have the written script in it. And then over time, the written script was hard to replicate and smaller. Right. And it turned into just the logo.
I see. There are a lot of questions here. Some of them are personal, and some of them have to do with Pepsi-Cola. This one asks, what is the decision you think that you shouldn't have taken one day during your time at Pepsi-Cola, and why? Have there been any sort of wayward decisions or times when you regretted something, or it may be a challenge that...
So I'll tell you two examples in my career of decisions poorly made, and they're different ones. But when I was working for Clairol, launching a line of shampoos and conditioners called Clairon, that was a big brand in France, and bringing it into the United States, I loved that position and I loved that company. When my husband got a job offer in Chicago, 1,000 miles away, and I moved with him, Clairol offered me an opportunity to go into sales. They didn't have a marketing office in Chicago, but they had a sales office. And I didn't see the world of general management. I didn't see how learning another discipline would really help me be a better overall business leader. So I said no, and I went back into advertising. I look back now, and I think one of the smartest things I could have done, having spent a lot of time in marketing, was to have gone into sales and understood what that took. Now at Pepsi, I followed market research too far. Great example, we needed a lemon-lime soft drink for our bottlers to distribute, and because Pepsi wasn't providing a lemon-lime soft drink, it was having trouble competing with Coke that made Sprite. And after a lot of research was done, it said, you know what would make for a different lemon-lime soda is one with caffeine. So we created this product called Storm. We put a lot of caffeine in it, as much as the government regulation allows you to put in. We put lightning bolts all over it, and we put it into market, and it failed horribly. And we spent millions of dollars testing this. Well, what I should have done is the analysis of, okay, just because people say that the lemon-lime soda will be different because it has caffeine in it, why don't you really think about the category? And the category of lemon-lime is a category that appeals to young kids. Moms let their kids drink it because it doesn't get them wired with caffeine. And older people drink it because it won't keep them up late at night. So as soon as you go out with a caffeinated lemon-lime, you're not allowing yourself to enjoy that part of the marketplace. And furthermore, think about it, energy drinks were coming into play. There's an energy drink in my hotel room upstairs. Energy drinks are a much better source of caffeine than getting it from a lemon-lime. So I could have thought through why that was probably a failed idea before we spent millions of dollars to test market it.
Right. Somebody here asks a very interesting question. During your time at Pepsi-Cola, what was the company's stance in Washington towards subsidized sugar rather than importing from Latin America?
That's a very interesting question. I will tell you that in Washington, they were subsidizing sugar. But what happened in the United States is that as Coke and Pepsi became very large products, they started, even though sugar was subsidized, it was expensive. It was an expensive ingredient to make Coke and Pepsi.
Yeah.
So they started to experiment with taking a derivative of corn, another highly subsidized industry in the United States, and take high fructose corn syrup and put it into Coke and Pepsi. And over time, this is a great lesson in changing your product. So here's what Coke and Pepsi did in the United States. And by the way, internationally, they didn't make that mistake as much. You have much more real sugar in Coke and Pepsi internationally. But in the United States, every couple of years, they would tweak, and they would take out 2 or 3% of the sugar, and they'd put high fructose corn syrup in. And they would do their taste tests and say, can people tell the difference?
Was
and
there
they
a
would
difference
say no.
in the taste?
So high fructose corn syrup does taste different than sugar.
Yeah.
But when you blend it, people can't tell the difference.
Right.
So when you make minor changes year after year after year, you actually create a beverage that does taste quite a bit different than the original, but you never realize the big changes because you didn't taste it relative to what it was 10 years ago. You tasted it relative to last year. So over time, Pepsi and Coke became made with 100% high fructose corn syrup. And people got used to the taste of it. So that if they, and one, the sugar industry shut down production.
My goodness.
So that if Coke and Pepsi today in the United States wanted to switch back to all sugar, there's not enough sugar to supply it. So secondly, it's more expensive. Now high fructose corn syrup has a bad name, and the industry's trying to do things to change that. They believe that the body processes high fructose corn syrup the same way it does sugar, but perceptually, people prefer regular, real sugar to high fructose corn syrup. So interesting question.
It is, yes. Another audience member is asking, in brief, what is the SWOT conclusion that you've reached regarding the Middle Eastern market? What do you see as our strengths and our weaknesses, the opportunities and threats that we're facing right now?
One of the great opportunities for the Middle East is obviously population growth, but a greater, the resources, the natural resources, and the financial capability the markets have is so much greater than if you go to a market like India or some of the markets in Asia. So the wealth of natural resources, the population growth, that's a great recipe for success. I think that the other opportunity, which is a young young base. A lot of markets are hurting because they don't have enough young people. So I think young people, and I think the sense that it's a very rapidly evolving. Use the example of smartphones. Because of the capability of economic growth and the money that exists in the Middle East, something like a smartphone can take off so much faster here than other parts of the world. I mean, iPhone 6 isn't sold in a lot of markets because there's not enough people who can afford it. So I think the opportunity for people to try products here. Now, the negative side is there's job pressure, job issues, but I think that's where the opportunity for entrepreneurs are to fill the gap. And one thing I've noticed in strong economies is that they don't just succeed because of big companies. They succeed because it's so important to have that entrepreneurial base that provides job opportunities for many. And it's the combination of, I mean, great economies usually have a very strong base of small independent business growth. And when the U.S. gets in trouble, it's because their entrepreneurship slows down. And when they get growing again, it's because more businesses are being formed.
I see. Where do you see the food market trend going for the companies that in the past used to, for the companies that used to sort of be more hinged on the more fast food, sort of unhealthy types of snacks and drinks?
Well, I think from an entrepreneurial standpoint, clearly people are voting that they want healthier products, and health should and can be defined very broadly. That can mean vitamin-enhanced products. It can mean just products that are made simply and grown close to home. I talked a little bit about Skinny Pop. I'll tell you, what they've learned at Skinny Pop is not to interpret skinny as thin, because thin tends to say to people less taste, to interpret skinny as just a few ingredients, because people think that that's better for them. So I think in the food business, going after health is a great opportunity. The thing I caution people, though, is you better deliver a product that tastes good, because people just aren't going to eat something because it's healthy. And for all of the healthy products, you know, it's a balance of having indulgent things. When you celebrate a birthday, you want a piece of cake. When, you know, you want a sweet, that it's not all about eating healthy all the time. It's about balance and moderation.
Another audience member is asking, if they weren't going to branch into the food industry for a small business venture, what other industry would you recommend for them to go into? Would it be telecommunication, medical, retail, or technology?
They all have great opportunity. I'm a big fan of the medical area, and I think not just medical in terms of doctors, but all the support tools that help people get medical services. If you look in the United States, it's not just about hospitals and doctors and nurses. It's about services that help people stay well, whether it's, you know, care for your feet or for your dog and vet services. It's things that are bringing services into the community, mobile service that are really growing, and a lot of private equity is investing in it.
Right, mobile health services.
Yeah, and I think technology is a great one, but the thing I caution people is technology evolves and changes so fast that what is great today, if it doesn't keep pace with technology, isn't necessarily great 2 years from now. So if you're going to enter that area, know that not only do you have something that's different today, take graphic chip cards. The way a graphic chip was made 2 years ago is totally different than how it's made today, and it will be totally different than 2 years from now, and you're going to have to keep pace with that change. The other thing is, if you're going to launch a business online, I can't tell you, or you're going to, let's say, launch an e-commerce business. It's a huge area of growth, and it's very successful because it allows people to shop and order at all times of the day using their smartphone device. But people are voting with where they go based on which sites work and which sites don't. I can tell you today, in retailer terms, how many retailers are struggling because it's not just build a website. Build a website that functions well. Build a website that's easy to navigate. There's a big sports channel in the United States called ESPN, and they developed 25 different apps. I mean, not only will that use up your whole memory on your phone just to lay them, but they didn't allow them to talk to each other. And over time, they weren't getting the growth in media attention, and they had to do a huge project to take that 25 different apps and make them 5. So if you're going to go in technology, think about making it easy for the consumer.
One of our lady audience members wants to know, how do you keep a work-life balance going?
I personally think that the word work-life balance is a tough one because it's really hard.
Yes, it is.
I think of it as work-life choices, and being very careful to pick the times that you're willing to make certain choices. So I will share with you that at Pepsi there was a culture around you're going to be viewed as a harder worker if you stay until 8 o'clock at night. Well, that means my children are in bed and I'm not going to see them at night. So to me, that was not a trade-off I was willing to make. So I made a point whenever I possibly could to get and leave at 6 o'clock and let people judge me on what I did, not how many hours I was spending in the office. And by the way, a lot of those hours were very social hours for people, and I'm not sure how much work was getting done. When I got to be more senior, I would walk around the halls and say, I'm leaving now, to try to change the culture that it was okay to leave, particularly as we were getting more and more people, women working, and honestly, young people working who were dealing with aging parents, which is its own set of issues.
That is very difficult. Dawn, this has been a very interesting conversation and a very sort of a valuable one as well for those of us here who maybe want to reach out to you further. Is there any way that we can get in touch with you? Perhaps through Facebook or Instagram?
Well, yeah, honestly, I would not be able to get back to all of you because I would have so much traffic from my job in the United States, and then I would feel badly. So I don't share those numbers so I would just say to contact this conference and they can find a way to get hold of me. Otherwise, I would be inundated and I would feel badly that I wasn't able to respond to all of you.
And finally, good luck with your career with the NFL as Chief Marketing Officer. Dawn recently joined forces with them, and we wish you all the luck in the world. We're going to be rooting for you, and I think a lot of us are going to start watching football more often now, especially now that we've met you.
It's odd on a crazy hour of night for you, however.
Well, yes, I know most of the football games take place at about 3 a.m. our time.
Yeah.
Most of us tend to be in bed, but many people I know do stay up to watch football. Are there any other questions from the audience members?
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure being here. I hope to meet each of you.
Thank you very much.